Hi, and welcome to Smart Prosperity Institute's webinar, How to Get Regular People to Pay Attention to Your Research. We're going to get the webinar started. This is the first webinar in a three-part series designed to help researchers reach their intended audience and ensure their environment economy research has impact. I'm Eric Campbell. I am currently the Director of Communications at Smart Prosperity Institute. I have lots of experience working with researchers in various capacities. I understand what you're up against, and I'm here to help. This webinar is going to be no longer than 30 minutes. For those listening live, you can pose a question at any time, and I invite you to using the Zoom chat tool, which should be clearly visible in your Zoom window. I'm going to address questions as we go. There won't be a separate Q&A period at the end, so pose away and I'll try to address them as we go. For those listening online in the future, because this webinar will be posted once it's complete, you can't do that, but what you can always do is reach out to Smart Prosperity Institute at info.smartprosperity.ca. As a clean economy research network and policy think tank, we always like engaging with researchers in this space. We'll be happy to answer questions at any time. Today, we focus on regular Canadians who are forming opinions about the green economy on the fly, sometimes based on dubious information they find online or hear from misinformed politicians. Put yourself in the regular Canadian's shoes. Thanks to the 21st century information age, internet, globalization, social media, etc., Canadians are faced every day with a deluge of information. How they survey that information and select which information to skim over and which to consume is a lot like being in the aisle at a grocery store. That's what this image is about. Here's the shopper, the regular Canadian, and here's the day's selection of information. Nobody can consume it all. Everybody needs to be picky. So how do you get the information that you're offering as a researcher in the mix? That's the question we want to answer today with today's webinar. And the goal, of course, how do you establish your research as something that people want to consume a lot of, want to tell their friends and family about, and keep them coming back to shop for more? Establish your brand so that people know that you're a researcher to come back to for the information, the kind of information that you provide. To achieve that, we need to look at three things. One, where do Canadians shop for information? Second, what kind of information do regular Canadians shop for? And how do you make your information stand out? So first, where do Canadians shop for information? I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of some stats. It will result in 4 key takeaways. First, here's the top 5 media that Canadians engage with on a weekly basis: TV, web, radio, and in a distant 4th and 5th, newspaper and magazine. Here's the data behind that one, showing print media declining since 2001, corresponding with the increased time spent on the internet. So is the newspaper dead? No, not for boomers, which is what the data tells us. And this is just a reminder that, of course, you should think about from the outset, and certainly as you start trying to communicate your research, who is your audience? And that will help determine to a large extent what kind of media, what kind of formats you want to use to deliver your research. Here's the data behind that one. Thanks to Totem Research for that. So, is TV king? Not exactly. It would be nice to get your research on The View or CNN, but not all of us are able to do that. And nor does this information tell us that that's exactly what you want to do. TV does reach the most people by a hair, but when it comes to how much time Canadians spend with each media, clearly this shows that the web is king. 261 minutes in a week is what the average Canadian spends on the web, compared to 202 minutes a week for TV, 94 minutes per week with the radio, often commuting to and from work, and certainly in more rural parts of Canada, radio is king, and 24 minutes a week with a newspaper. Now, I know that you're researchers, so behind all of these statements that I'm giving, I'm going to show stats and graphs to show you that there is research behind this. This is me being cognizant of my audience, and I encourage you to do the same thing. I would not be sharing graphs and stats if I were delivering this presentation to the public, but I know researchers, being researchers, you're interested to see the sources and where these things come from. You like graphs and charts. Most Canadians don't like graphs and charts. So that's just another kind of guideline, which is to be cognizant of your audience all the time. So here's this is the graph that supports that last statement, thanks to eMarketer for this data. So Canadians are spending a lot of time on the web. This is where we go shopping for information, or it's one of the key places where we go shopping for information. The question then obviously comes up, what are we doing on the web? Well, email and online banking, very personal, very utilitarian activities. But then look at the next two, social media and news gathering. I include online shopping in there only because, of course, at this time of year, a lot of people are doing online shopping. But really, the third and fourth most popular activities on the web are social media and news gathering. And social media, whether you like it or not, you're information gathering. So these are two key entry points for researchers looking to communicate their research. Here's the data behind that one. So social media, here is how Canadians are spending that time in a given week. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter. If you're not familiar with each of these media, I invite you and I encourage you to get familiar with them. This is where Canadians are spending their time. All of them provide entry points for communicating research, although there are obviously, and those of you who are familiar with Instagram and Pinterest, for example, there are constraints, and it definitely has implications for how you format your research, how you format the information that you're putting out there. We're going to return to this point a little bit later in the presentation. There's the data behind that. Now, this chart from Polara shows the dynamics with social media among different age groups. So again, be cognizant of your audience. The same kind of data is available. It's out there based on male, female, region, and so on and so forth. This is just a quick glance at a breakdown by ages. There is variation from channel to channel based on the age group. So again, as I mentioned, think hard about who you're trying to reach and use the right media to reach them. Now, here is the kink in the machine. You may have thought that this was all leading to a big point about you got to use social media. Well, here's the kink. Trust in media sources, and this is again focused on Canadians. 50%, 57%, over 50% trust what they see in the web and what they see in traditional media. Way fewer than that, half of that, trust what they see on social media. So this is certainly the a factor that we need to take consideration of. I'm also going to revisit this later in the presentation and show you what kind of the offsetting factor is for using social media as a channel for promoting your research. And there's the data behind that. So when we ask, where do Canadians shop for information? Here are the 4 key takeaways that I want to leave with you. First, online, TV, and radio. Those are the, if you want to reach the largest amount of regular Canadians, these are the 3 media you're trying to use. Now, with the caveat and takeaway number 2, unless you're targeting specific age groups. If you're going for older age group, then traditional media is still and probably the #1 way of reaching them. And if you're, depending on which age groups you're trying to target, it will affect which social media channels, which web channels you use. Got a question online, where does LinkedIn fit in? LinkedIn it's interesting. Some of the charts show us that LinkedIn is used frequently. And even number 2 to Facebook in some charts have it showing, depending on how you pose the question, how you pose the question in the poll. But we need to think about LinkedIn. Because we use it at Smart Prosperity a lot. We use it next to Facebook and Twitter as kind of our third most used social media channel. But we know that we're reaching a certain kind of audience with LinkedIn. We're reaching people who A, have careers, B, or are looking to grow their careers, and B, people who are looking to share and looking to consume information that are related to career and to career growth. So it's up there. Certainly the charts show, if I go back a couple slides, you'll see that LinkedIn, 21% of people report using LinkedIn regularly. There are other charts that would show us that, in terms of minutes spent, it is a popular social media channel. Again, it has a certain kind of audience that's engaged on that channel. So the third key takeaway here, the social media factor, high engagement, low trust. A lot of Canadians are on social media. A lot of Canadians aren't trusting a whole lot that they see on social media. There's a tension there. And like I said, I'm gonna return to that one because there is a way to offset that low trust so that your research kind of reaches its intended target and people trust it. And the fourth takeaway is Facebook and YouTube. Those are the top 2 social media channels that Canadians use on a regular basis. And think about what that means in terms of format. Obviously, YouTube, it just screams at you, video, okay. Not every researcher is in the habit of putting out videos to promote their research, but certainly the stats would suggest that, that we should consider that. Facebook, for those of you who aren't on Facebook, I encourage you to give it a try, if only to understand how one of these major channels for gathering information works. A lot of images and some text. So getting to the question, shouldn't we think of social media as an amplifier for everything else? Yes, absolutely. It's in the mix. Now, what I'm suggesting here and what the numbers I think support is that it's in the mix big time. In terms of where Canadians are gathering their information, increasingly, it's social media and it's web. So, going back to those stats that show how much time people spend with each meeting in a given week, if you're looking to get included in an article, if you're doing a media pitch with a traditional newspaper, that's great. But at the end of the day, you might be reaching fewer people than if you develop a really comprehensive social media strategy. So it's an amplifier, but it needs to also be kind of a core part of your strategy if you want to reach regular Canadians. So all of this leads to our second question: what kind of information are Canadians shopping for? Which aisle are they looking down? What are they looking to pull off the shelf? Here, I'm going to refer only quickly to some polling that was done by Abacus Data ahead of the recent election. Basically, what's trendy? Climate change. Climate change is in the top 3 issues for Canadians. In other words, if you're doing research related to the climate, if you're in this environment economy space, your time is now. Canadians are extremely receptive to information on climate right now. Take advantage of that because it won't always be that way. And to make that point, I'm going to show you the same data in the US, which shows environment and climate change way down the list. So your research peers in the US right now don't have it so easy. They're not, the shoppers in the US are not shopping down your aisle, but in Canada, they are. So that's a window of opportunity, over the next couple of years, possibly longer. We expect certainly climate change has kind of been in or near those top 3 for the past 5 years. Before that, it wasn't in the top 3. And we could expect it to probably be there for another couple of years, but trends change. And after that, you might find it difficult to get people to pay attention to your research, and that's just a fact of life. So then you have to try harder to reach regular Canadians with your research. But right now, the time is now. Here's the two kind of data points that that support that approach. So the key takeaways: Canadians are in your aisle right now. Americans not so much. As a result, you should find uptake for your research if you format it properly. And that brings us to, how do you make your information stand out? In this fast-paced, high-volume information marketplace, what is going to differentiate your research and how you're communicating it? Here, I'm going to suggest 4 guidelines, and this is, I think, kind of the meat of the presentation. So I'll slow down a little bit as we go through this, and if there are questions, please please pose them as we go, so that I can so that I'm not missing anything. Guideline number 1: spin your research into many different products. You've done a lot of work. Don't let it stay as a research report. If there were a stat on how many people have read a research report in the past week, it would be very, very low, at least in the context of regular Canadians. So put in the little bit of extra work, and I say little bit, it's not a little bit, it's a lot of extra work. And I know when you get to the end of your research report, you know, you've put in so many hours, and you're really tempted to just leave it where it is. You'll find that the bit of extra work that you put in to turn it into different formats is well worth it, and it will get you a whole lot of extra mileage with your work. So put in that little bit of extra work now, adapt it, and put it in different formats. Here are some formats that we use a lot at Smart Prosperity. You know, I'd be, you know, have a look at the institute.smartprosperity.ca website. You'll see how we use them. I'm also going to point in a couple seconds to some of the best practices that are out there. But basically, the more formats, the merrier. And it also leads to our guideline number 2, which is scale your formats. And here's what I mean by that. Here is how you approach your research. Work on the report. Then, if you've got a little bit of extra energy, you spin it into a brief. Then you turn it into a blog article, and then maybe a tweet, and then an infograph, if you go that route. But basically, you're kind of narrowing down the information into smaller and smaller formats as you go. Here's how regular people will approach your work if you do this well. Regular people like bite-sized information. They don't want to commit to something big right off the bat. To begin with, you have 5 seconds. The 5-second rule that they're going to, that regular people have to dedicate to your information. Your job is to give them something in that 5 seconds that is value added, and then get them to turn that 5 seconds into 20 seconds, into 30 seconds, into 1 minute, into 5 minutes, and so on and so forth. You need to get them to that research report. If that's really where you want them to end up, you need to get them there. You need to hold their hands and kind of walk them down that path, and make it alluring for them. Create entry points into your work. The fewer entry points, the less likelihood regular people will get to the finish line. So if you skip one of these steps, then you're asking people to jump right into a blog right off the bat. A fewer number of Canadians are willing to do that. And if you haven't got that blog, then you're asking them to jump into a policy brief right away. And we can imagine how many Canadians we eliminate by asking them to do that. So link to guideline number 1 and 2. You know, if we're talking about spinning off your research into different products and making sure that those products have different scales so that there are entry points into your work, it naturally leads us to guideline number 3, which is refining your message. Boil it down, and boil it down some more. Right down to a headline so that it fits the formats through which regular Canadians consume information. And at the same time, so that it leaves them with some value-added information, even if they don't want to look for more, even if they don't want to jump from that 10 words up to that 20 words, or from that 700 words up to the 3,000 words, leave them with something so that they can walk away with, they are smarter at the end of the day, even if they haven't dived in and done all their, all the background kind of reading. They've got something that they can speak to at the end of the day when they're sitting around the dinner table with their family or when they're speaking with their friends. And the other thing to do with, by refining your message, is to make sure that in each of these little tidbits, there's something that lures them into wanting to know more. So with a headline, you want to lure people into that infograph, or you want to lure people to that tweet so that they can get more information. And from the tweet, you want to lure them into key messages or into your blog or your newspaper article, you know, which is typically at 700 words. The average op-ed runs from 650 to 750 words. To get people to that point, you need to have kind of left this this trail of breadcrumbs there that makes them want to get there, that makes them want to consume more information. Otherwise, they're going to be walking down the shopping aisle and looking for something else and leave your piece of information behind. So I'm just going to address a question right now saying that the previous few slides on public priorities suggest to me that researchers could benefit from linking their work on climate to the cost of living or healthcare. That is a great point. That was pointing back to the Abacus data, which had been done ahead of the Canadian election, and showing that the top priorities for Canadians right now are in order: cost of living, healthcare, and environment, and climate change. So yeah, and of course, as you can imagine, over time, those top three issues and those top three concerns facing regular Canadians will change. So it's a great suggestion. Link your research to those top three issues, recognizing that those are the hooks, those are the things that are at the front of people's minds right now. Those are the shopping aisles that people are walking down. Take advantage of that, leverage that if there are obvious links there, even if you have to manufacture a couple links there. It's a way of getting people down your aisle and looking at your product and taking it off the shelf. So now I want to jump into just a few examples of people who, or of formats that do it well. I'm going to pick on some tweets right now, only because tweets at 240 characters, that is a great, that's a great elevator pitch right there. We can refine our message even more, but tweets, is a pretty good guideline. Try to get down to a 240 character, which is a 20 to 30 word length when you're pitching your information. Try to boil down your key message or one of your key messages down to that length. Here are some people who do it well. Andrew Leach from the University of Alberta does it extremely well. Also, what Twitter allows you to do is to kind of weave in a graph or an image in there. A lot of Canadians, as we saw in terms of their social media usage, they are engaging increasingly through images. And maybe this is the time for me to make that point. When we're looking at the top social media channels, right up there, of course, Facebook, which is very image heavy, and then Instagram and Pinterest. I mean, if you want to, we were talking about refining language, refining your message down to fewest words. See if you can refine it down into an image, at least an image with a caption or an infograph or a chart. Those are all increasingly how kind of preferred ways for Canadians to be consuming information. Twitter allows you to do that. Here are two examples of people who are doing it well: Andrew Leach, Simon Donner at UBC. Again, fitting in a nice kind of referenced information, even if I only read that 140 character text, I'm walking away with something there. But then if I look into the chart, then I'm walking away with more information. It gets me interested in learning more. And the other valuable exercise is to think in terms of headlines. What is the media headline for your research? Here are some examples of recent news around the recent UN report. Look at the words that get picked up. unprecedented, inadequate, quadrupled, based on the recent ecofiscal report. Without sensationalizing your research findings, I realize that, you'll probably be fairly defensive about doing that, but you need to boil down your message to a strong and irresistible hook. The people who are the best at doing that are journalists. So, have a look at, look through the Globe and Mail, look through, the Sun papers. I hate to say it, but the Sun papers, partly because of sensationalizing, but they really reduce messages down into very short, very snappy, very irresistible headlines. It makes it impossible not to read those articles, or at least to start down reading those articles. Think about what the headline is for your research. It won't always be the key message of your research. Sometimes it will just be one stat that popped up in your research. I know, for example, that Ecofiscal was a little disappointed that kind of the big thing that jumped out of their report, or at least that journalists reported on, was this quadrupling of the carbon tax. It's $210 a ton as being the cheapest way to meet Canada's climate targets. That was one of many messages in the report. It got picked up, it was irresistible, and that's the story that got shared at the end of the day. Think about your research through the same lens. What are some of those? What are some of those stats? What are some of those messages that that are irresistible? That even if they're not the key message of your report, that are going to be a hook for getting people interested in reading your research. Moving on, infographs are a wonderful format. They take a little bit of, you either need to partner with somebody who knows some graphic design, or you need to figure out some tools yourself. PowerPoint is a great tool for building simple infographics. This is one from Ecofiscal. They were fantastic at it. This is one from Smart Prosperity Institute. This is, gosh, I want to say almost 8 or 9 years old, and yet it is still the most used media, the most used, most visited material on our website. And it's because at the time we invested in, we had a big report on the cost of sprawl. We turned it into a nice infographic, and it's irresistible. People use it over and over and over again. And this is for an organization that doesn't have, a sole and exclusive focus on the urban level. This was something where we were telling an environment economy story, and yet still, this has reached kind of the largest audience of any smart prosperity product. Is there a suggested word count for infographics? Yes. I would say, this infographic has too many words on it. I've seen it used in Twitter. I've seen it used on Facebook, and you need to click on it. You need to open it in order to actually read the words. People don't mind doing that, but you're going to reach more people if you can read it when it's about 600 pixels wide or 300 pixels wide. In other words, about 5 inches across. So the number of words that you can fit on there are fewer. I'm going to point to another group that does this really well. Sorry, this is a Smart Prosperity Institute. I'm going to point to another one also, but this is a nice image, a nice shareable that gets across a key piece of information. It's one that we're circulating right now for the release of a new report that Smart Prosperity Institute has put out. The other group I wanted to point to is Clean Energy Canada. They do fantastic shareables. This is a great, maybe this is less infograph, more shareable. Where one ends and the other begins is a little bit up for debate, and it doesn't matter. The fact is, you're getting information across, you're making it visual, you're making it easy to consume. This was done on PowerPoint, I'm going to guess, and if it wasn't, you could easily do this on PowerPoint, and just like that, you get kind of a nice little infograph that supports your research. Where do we want to go after that? Guideline number 4, and this is the last guideline, and then I'm going to wrap up the presentation. In terms of how do you make your information stand out promote your affiliations. Now, remember earlier that I said there's low trust for the information that people see on social media? Well, here is the foil for that particular stat. As researchers, as academics, as people who are experts, nonpartisan experts in your field, you are one of the people that Canadians trust the most. It's hard to find a single data point that supports that, so I'm going to point to three most trusted industries in Canada, universities and colleges, most and least trusted professions in the world, scientists. If you're a scientist, you're even more untouchable. And an influencer that's considered an expert in their field is trusted by 65% of Canadians. So promote your affiliations. If you are, doesn't matter if you're a student, doesn't matter if you're an adjunct prof, it doesn't matter if you're a sessional prof, having that university affiliation next to your name, or whether it's or if it's a think tank, it's a think tank. If it is a research organization, it's a research organization. Put that there, because you know, Brendan Frank from Eco Fiscal Commission is more alluring and more credible than just Brendan Frank. And Eric Campbell from Smart Prosperity Institute at the University of Ottawa is more credible than just Eric Campbell. There's lots of names out there on the internet. There's not quite as many affiliations. Use that. Because the other thing is that, you know, your affiliations, whatever they are, whatever university or college or group that you're with, has some brand credibility already. It has some, what we call in the marketing space, brand equity. And even if people are unfamiliar with your name, they will be familiar with your institution, or they might be familiar with your institution. And that will make you more trustworthy and make the research that you're putting out there more credible and more trustworthy right off the bat. So I'm getting a question. I've seen data showing there's very little trust in think tanks. In Canada, we haven't got a whole lot of data on this. I'm piecing this together based on the research that I'm familiar with. Think tanks, a lot of it, the data comes down a lot, and how what data you get comes down to how questions are asked. I'm sure as researchers, many of you know that. And sometimes definitely the word think tank doesn't poll very well. We at the Smart Prosperity Institute are in the habit of calling ourselves a think tank and a do tank. It turns out that do tank polls better than think tank, which is funny because it's not even a word. But yeah, think tanks might not kind of resonate with Canadians, but Smart Prosperity Institute does. And there's a reason that when we rebranded, we put Institute in our name, because it does kind of generate that kind of inherent credibility. Another question: source of funding. Yes, we find that we have the sources of funding for Smart Prosperity Institute noted on our webpage. We try to make it as transparent and accessible as possible. It's also one of the least visited pages on our website. So not a lot of people are actually digging for that information. Often, the people who look for that information are the people who are trying to smear you in the first place. So yes, I think that can increase trust, but really, Canadians, when they're walking down that shopping aisle, are making these calls passively. And if not passively, then at least really quickly. And they're going to do it just based on your name. If they're following, if you're trying to promote your research through social media, then they're just going to look at your name and your write-up. If it's a research brief that they see on a table somewhere, then they're going to look at, who's it by, what's the affiliation. They're not necessarily flipping the page and looking to see, the acknowledgements or, what the source of the funding is. So where, yes, I think source of funding, it's really important to be transparent. In terms of increasing the trust of Canadians, the easiest way to do it is just to share your affiliations. So I hope that that helped. Again, here are the takeaways from how do you make your information stand out, spin your research into many different products, scale those formats so that you've got some bite-sized things in there and you've left that trail of breadcrumbs up to kind of the big products. Refine your message to the point that you're uncomfortable with it. You know, you might not want to be sensationalizing the research. You shouldn't be sensationalizing the research. You want to be accurate, but um, but you know, get it right up to that point where you're almost uncomfortable with it, because it just boils it down to such an irresistible hook that it almost challenges those kind of researcher instincts that you have to, you know, want to shore up everything with sources and citations. And finally, promote your affiliations. It's a way of, in this very, like I say, high volume, fast-paced information marketplace, to ensure that Canadians see your research as a trustworthy source. So with that, I want to thank you for taking part in the webinar. We've got 2 other parts to this webinar series, which is all about communicating your research and getting impact for your research. Our next 2 webinars, one in January and one in later January, are focused on approaching the policy audience. Government is a very different kind of audience, and how you package your information for to influence policy change. And the 3rd webinar is focused on media. How do you get, I know a lot of the questions raised through this webinar is, okay, I want to get into a newspaper, I want to get into online information pieces. How do you get there? I encourage you to sign up, which you can do right now for those 2 webinars later in the series. Thanks everybody for participating. Keep up to date with Smart Prosperity Institute. We look forward to seeing the information and the research that comes out of your various corners.